What if the real reason you have no peace is not the world, but the you you're trying so hard to protect? Every time you feel offended, jealous, ignored, or angry, something inside you is fighting to survive. In Buddhism, that something is called ego. Gautama Buddha taught that the more you cling to this false sense of I, the more you suffer. And here is the truth most people are afraid to face. The thing you defend the most may be the very thing destroying your inner peace. The illusion of I. Before ego becomes arrogance, before it becomes pride, before it becomes defensiveness, it begins with something much more subtle. It begins with the simple idea, this is me. From childhood, you were taught to build an identity, your name, your achievements, your failures, your personality, your opinions. Slowly, layer by layer, a mental image formed, an image you now call myself. But Buddhism asks a question most people never dare to ask. Where exactly is this self? When Gautama Buddha awakened, he deeply examined his own experience. What he discovered became one of the most revolutionary teachings in human history, Anatta, the doctrine of non-self. He saw that what we call I is not a solid entity. It is a process. Your body is changing every second. Cells die and regenerate. You do not have the same body you had 10 years ago. Your emotions constantly shift. Happy in the morning, irritated in the afternoon, calm at night. Your thoughts come and go like clouds. One moment confident, next moment doubtful. Even your beliefs evolve with time. If everything inside you is changing, what exactly is permanent? The ego survives by creating the illusion of continuity. It stitches together memories and says, this is who I am. It attaches to experiences and says, this happened to me. It clings to opinions and says, this defines me. But when you look closely, you see something extraordinary. There is thinking, but no fixed thinker. There is feeling, but no permanent feeler. There is reacting, but no solid reactor. Just processes unfolding. Ego is the mistaken belief that these changing processes belong to a solid, independent owner, and from this misunderstanding, suffering is born. When someone criticizes you, the ego feels attacked. When someone succeeds, the ego feels threatened. When someone ignores you, the ego feels diminished. Why? Because it believes there is something solid that must be protected. But Buddhism teaches that this solid self is an illusion. Like a rainbow, it appears real, but when you try to grasp it, there is nothing you can hold. The problem is not having thoughts. The problem is identifying with them. The problem is not having emotions. The problem is saying, this is me. Imagine watching a river flow. Water moves constantly, yet we call it the same river. In reality, the water is never the same. In the same way, what you call yourself is a flowing stream of physical and mental events. Ego freezes that flow and declares it permanent. And the moment you try to freeze something that is naturally changing, tension arises. That tension is the beginning of inner disturbance. Peace is disturbed not because life changes, but because ego resists change. The Buddha did not teach non-self to make people feel small. He taught it to free them from unnecessary suffering. Because if there is no fixed self, then there is nothing fragile to defend. Criticism becomes sound. Praise becomes sound. Gain and loss become temporary conditions. When you deeply see that the I is only a process, something softens inside you. You stop reacting to protect an image. You stop fighting to maintain an identity. You stop carrying the heavy burden of proving yourself. And in that softness, for the first time, peace begins to breathe. This is where the journey truly starts. Not by destroying the ego with force, but by seeing clearly that the ego was never solid to begin with. There is a subtle hunger inside the human mind that almost no one questions. It does not hunger for food. It does not hunger for wealth alone. It hungers to be someone. It wants to feel significant, recognized, secure in identity. This hunger is so normalized that most people mistake it for ambition, confidence, or personality. But in Buddhist understanding, this constant need to solidify who I am is one of the deepest roots of suffering. The ego does not shout at first. It whispers quietly. It asks, "How am I being seen right now?" It wonders, "Do they respect me?" It fears, "What if I lose my position?" These thoughts appear harmless, yet they create a constant undercurrent of tension. The mind becomes busy managing an image rather than experiencing life directly. Gautama Buddha observed that this hunger is a form of craving. In the Four Noble Truths, craving is identified as the origin of suffering. Most people interpret craving as desire for pleasure or material gain, but craving also includes the desire for identity, status, and recognition. The ego feeds on this craving. It builds a narrative and then clings to it tightly. Notice how quickly discomfort arises when your identity feels challenged. A simple disagreement can feel like an attack. A small criticism can echo for hours inside your mind. Even silence from someone you expect attention from can disturb your peace. The intensity of these reactions reveals how deeply attached we are to the image of ourselves. This attachment creates instability because identity is not fixed. Circumstances change, roles change, relationships shift. The confident person can experience failure. The admired individual can face rejection. The respected leader can lose influence. When identity depends on conditions, peace becomes fragile. The ego constantly measures itself against others. It compares achievements, appearance, intelligence, and social standing. This comparison generates pride or insecurity, both of which disturb the mind. If you feel superior, you must maintain that position. If you feel inferior, you must escape it. Either way, the mind cannot rest. Buddhist wisdom reveals that this restless movement comes from misunderstanding reality. The self we defend is not solid. It is a dynamic flow of experiences arising and passing. Thoughts arise, emotions arise, perceptions arise. None of them remain permanently, yet the ego tries to freeze this flowing process and label it as me. When life inevitably contradicts that label, suffering follows. Inner peace becomes possible when this hunger to be someone is clearly seen. When you observe the mind seeking validation and do not immediately obey it, space opens. When you notice the urge to defend yourself and instead remain aware, something softens. The ego weakens not through force, but through understanding. Without the pressure to maintain an identity, conversations become lighter. Mistakes become lessons instead of threats. Praise becomes pleasant, but not addictive. Criticism becomes informative rather than devastating. The heart no longer swings wildly between pride and shame. There is profound freedom in not needing to be special, superior, or even consistently impressive. There is freedom in allowing yourself to be a changing process rather than a fixed character. In that freedom, the nervous tension that once dominated the mind begins to dissolve. The ego believes peace comes from strengthening identity. Buddhism shows that peace comes from loosening it. When the invisible hunger quiets, the mind stops grasping. When grasping stops, suffering fades. And in that quiet fading, something extraordinary appears, a steady calm that does not depend on how you are perceived, what you achieve, or how perfectly you perform. That calm is not created by ego. It is revealed when ego no longer controls the mind. Deep within the structure of ego lies a powerful mechanism that quietly steals inner peace comparison. The mind rarely rests in simple awareness. Instead, it measures constantly. It evaluates, ranks, and judges. It asks who is ahead, who is behind, who is better, and who is worse. This measuring process feels natural, yet it creates an invisible prison. The ego survives by positioning itself. It wants to be above, or at least not below. It wants to be admired, or at minimum not ignored. Even humility can become a disguised form of ego when it secretly seeks recognition for being humble. The comparison does not stop, because the ego cannot survive in neutrality. It must define itself against something. Gautama Buddha taught that suffering arises from ignorance of reality. One of the deepest forms of ignorance is believing in a separate, solid self that must compete for value. When the mind identifies strongly with this imagined self, it begins scanning the world for confirmation of worth. Every interaction becomes a silent evaluation. If someone succeeds, the ego feels diminished. If someone fails, the ego may feel secretly relieved. If someone receives praise, the mind quickly checks whether it deserves more. This endless calculation creates tension that rarely leaves the body. Even moments of success carry anxiety, because success must be maintained. Comparison also breeds fear. Beneath the desire to be superior lies a deeper fear of being nobody. The ego trembles at the idea of invisibility. It fears irrelevance more than failure. This fear drives constant activity, constant performance, and constant mental rehearsal. The mind becomes crowded with narratives about how it should appear and how it must improve. Buddhist wisdom invites a radical shift in perspective. Instead of asking how you rank among others, it asks you to observe the nature of experience itself. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions arise and pass. Sensations arise and pass. In direct awareness, there is no hierarchy. There is only unfolding. When mindfulness becomes strong, the measuring mind becomes visible. You begin to notice the subtle tightening when someone receives attention. You observe the surge of pride when you are praised. You see the contraction of insecurity when you feel overlooked. This observation creates distance between awareness and ego. In that distance, comparison loses its authority. Without comparison, there is no superiority and no inferiority. There is only difference. Difference does not require defense. It does not require competition. It simply exists. The mountain does not compare itself to the river. The sky does not compete with the ocean. Each expresses its nature without anxiety. Human beings, influenced by ego, forget this simplicity. They carry an invisible scoreboard inside their minds. Buddhism gently removes that scoreboard. It reveals that value is not something earned through dominance or validation. True worth is not a ranking system. It is intrinsic to being conscious and alive. When the fear of being nobody dissolves, something profound happens. The urge to perform relaxes. The need to impress softens. You no longer enter conversations seeking to win. You listen without planning your superiority. You speak without calculating your image. The nervous tension that once accompanied social situations begins to fade. Inner peace grows stronger when comparison weakens, because peace does not need to compete. It does not need to prove. It does not depend on external measurement. It arises naturally when the mind stops dividing the world into winners and losers. The ego believes that constant comparison ensures safety and relevance. In reality, it ensures exhaustion. Buddhism offers another way. It points toward direct experience without narrative, awareness without ranking, presence without performance. In that state, you are not superior. You are not inferior. You are simply present. And in simple presence, the prison doors quietly open. There is a reason your mind feels tired, even when your body is resting. There is a reason you replay conversations long after they are over. There is a reason a single sentence from someone can echo in your thoughts for days. The ego is always fighting. It is always defending. It is always preparing for the next attack that may never even come. The battle is not visible from the outside, yet inside it is constant. The ego builds an image and then guards it as if survival depends on it. That image may be I am intelligent, I am kind, I am strong, or even I am misunderstood. Once the mind attaches to any fixed identity, it becomes fragile. Every contradiction feels dangerous. Every disagreement feels personal. In Buddhist understanding, this is the suffering of clinging. The mind clings not only to objects or people, but to ideas about itself. It clings to roles, titles, memories, and beliefs. It says, "This defines me," and once something defines you, you must protect it. Gautama Buddha taught that clinging leads directly to suffering because everything in existence is impermanent. When you attach to something that constantly changes, instability is unavoidable. Identity is not fixed, yet the ego insists that it is. That insistence creates tension. Notice how quickly the body reacts when your identity feels threatened. The heart rate shifts, the jaw tightens, the stomach contracts. These physical sensations reveal how deeply the ego equates image with survival. The mind interprets disagreement as danger, criticism as injury, and rejection as collapse. The response becomes disproportionate because the ego believes it is protecting something essential. This defense mechanism creates isolation. When you are busy protecting an image, you cannot truly connect. You listen not to understand, but to prepare your response. You speak not to express truth, but to maintain control. Even silence becomes strategic. Life turns into a battlefield of subtle psychological warfare. The tragedy is that the battle is built upon illusion. The self being defended is not solid. It is a collection of memories and mental labels. It shifts with circumstances. It adapts with experience. Yet the ego treats it as permanent and sacred. Fighting for something that is constantly changing guarantees exhaustion. Buddhism offers a radically different approach. Instead of strengthening the walls around identity, it encourages observing the process of identification itself. When a defensive reaction arises, mindfulness notices it. When anger surges, awareness sees the surge without immediately acting on it. In that observation, space appears. That space is powerful. It interrupts the automatic chain of reaction. Instead of attacking back, you pause. Instead of justifying yourself, you breathe. Instead of escalating conflict, you witness the discomfort. In that witnessing, the illusion weakens. The ego cannot thrive when exposed to clear awareness. Gradually, the need to win diminishes. The urgency to prove yourself softens. You begin to understand that disagreement does not threaten your existence. Criticism does not erase your being. Rejection does not dissolve your worth. These experiences only disturb the image, not awareness itself. When you stop defending the illusion, peace becomes stable. You no longer carry the invisible armor that once weighed on your mind. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer battles. Relationships deepen because they are no longer negotiations of status. The mind rests because it is not constantly preparing for war. The ego believes that constant defense ensures strength. In truth, it ensures tension. Real strength, according to Buddhist wisdom, comes from non-attachment. It comes from knowing that nothing about your identity needs to be permanent. It comes from understanding that awareness itself is not harmed by opinion. When the illusion is no longer guarded, silence feels safe. Simplicity feels natural. Presence feels enough. The battle ends not because you defeated others, but because you stopped defending something that was never solid to begin with. And in that ending, inner peace is not fragile anymore. It becomes steady, grounded in clarity rather than identity. There comes a moment in every sincere spiritual journey when the ego begins to feel unstable. The strategies that once felt powerful start to feel heavy. The constant defending becomes exhausting. The need to prove feels hollow. It is not that life becomes easier, it is that the illusion becomes harder to maintain. The identity that once seemed solid begins to crack. This cracking is not failure. It is awakening. For most of your life, the ego convinced you that control equals safety. It taught you that if you manage your image carefully, you will avoid pain. It suggested that if you become impressive enough, intelligent enough, admired enough, then peace will follow. Yet even after achievements, recognition or validation, the mind remains restless. There is always another level to reach, another comparison to win, another insecurity to silence. The problem is not ambition itself. The problem is believing that peace lies at the end of identity building. Buddhism reveals that no identity, no matter how refined, can deliver permanent peace, because identity itself is impermanent. Gautama Buddha discovered this through direct insight. Under the Bodhi tree, he did not strengthen a new identity. He saw through the illusion of all identities. He realized that clinging to any fixed self creates suffering because reality is fluid. Everything is in motion. Body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, all arise and pass away. When ego begins to collapse, it feels uncomfortable at first. You may experience confusion because the familiar narrative of who you are starts to loosen. You may feel vulnerable because the protective armor is thinning. You may even feel fear because the mind equates identity loss with danger. But something else begins to emerge alongside that discomfort: spaciousness. Without the constant need to maintain an image, the mind becomes quieter. You notice that many of your previous reactions were automatic attempts to defend something imaginary. You begin to see how much energy was spent protecting opinions, chasing approval, and resisting change. As awareness deepens, you recognize that thoughts are events, not definitions. Emotions are waves, not identity. Sensations are movements, not ownership. There is experiencing, but no fixed experiencer. There is awareness, but no solid self inside awareness. This recognition is liberating. When someone criticizes you, there is still sound entering the ears and thoughts forming in the mind, but there is less personal sting. Without a rigid identity to protect, the words lose their sharpness. They become information rather than injury. When someone praises you, there is warmth, but it does not inflate the ego. It passes naturally without creating dependency. The collapse of ego does not make you passive. It makes you flexible. Flexibility is strength in Buddhist understanding. A rigid tree breaks in a storm. A flexible one bends and survives. The ego is rigid because it insists on consistency and control. Awareness is flexible because it understands impermanence. As ego loosens, relationships transform. You no longer enter conversations to dominate or defend. You listen more deeply because you are not preoccupied with how you appear. You speak more honestly because you are not shaping every word to protect identity. Authentic connection becomes possible because there is less performance. Inner peace grows stronger in this space, not because problems disappear, but because the internal resistance decreases. Pain may still arise, but suffering diminishes. In Buddhism, pain is inevitable, yet suffering is optional. Suffering arises when ego clings and resists. When clinging weakens, even difficulty can be met with calm clarity. There is also a profound humility that develops. Not the kind of humility that pretends to be small, but the natural humility that comes from seeing reality clearly. You recognize that your experiences are shaped by countless causes and conditions. Your successes are not entirely self-created. Your failures are not entirely personal flaws. Everything arises from interdependent factors. This understanding softens pride and dissolves shame simultaneously. Without pride, you do not inflate yourself. Without shame, you do not diminish yourself. You stand balanced, neither superior nor inferior, just present. The ego fears being nobody. It believes that without identity, there is emptiness. But Buddhist emptiness is not void. It is openness. It is freedom from fixation. It is the absence of rigid self-concepts that once caused suffering. In that openness, compassion naturally expands. When you are not obsessed with defending yourself, you begin to see others more clearly. You recognize that they too are driven by ego, by fear, by craving. Instead of reacting with anger, empathy arises. Instead of competition, understanding grows. Compassion is not forced. It flows naturally from the absence of self-centered fixation. The collapse of ego also reveals something subtle yet powerful. Awareness itself has always been peaceful. Beneath the noise of identity, beneath the stories and defenses, there has always been a quiet presence observing everything. That presence does not compete. It does not compare. It does not crave validation. It simply knows. Meditation strengthens this recognition. As you sit quietly and observe the breath, you begin to see thoughts appear and disappear without ownership. You notice how quickly the ego tries to claim them. It says, "This is my thought." But when observed carefully, thoughts arise spontaneously. They are events in consciousness, not possessions. The more clearly you see this, the weaker the illusion becomes. You stop chasing every mental impulse. You stop reacting to every emotional surge. You allow experiences to move through you without constructing a fixed identity around them. Peace is not created in this process. It is uncovered. It was always there, hidden beneath the constant effort of becoming someone. It was obscured by the tension of self-protection. It was drowned out by the noise of comparison and defense. When those layers dissolve, peace reveals itself as your natural state. This is the true transformation described in Buddhist wisdom. It is not about becoming extraordinary in the eyes of the world. It is about seeing through the illusion that caused inner turmoil. It is about realizing that the self you were fighting to protect was never solid. And when that realization stabilizes, something extraordinary happens. You move through life lightly. You still act. You still speak. You still work and love and create, but there is less fear underneath it all. There is less urgency to prove. There is less anxiety about perception. There is a steady calm that does not depend on status, praise, or control. The ego once promised protection, but delivered tension. Its collapse may feel frightening at first, but it delivers freedom. When there is nothing left to defend, the heart rests. When the heart rests, the mind becomes clear. When the mind is clear, peace is no longer fragile. It becomes unshakable. And that unshakable peace is the true insight of Buddhist wisdom. Just when you believe you have understood the ego, it transforms. It becomes quieter, more refined, more subtle. It stops saying, "I am better than others." It starts saying, "I am more aware than others." It stops chasing obvious praise. It begins chasing spiritual superiority. This is the final and most dangerous layer of ego, the spiritual identity. After learning about non-self, mindfulness and detachment, the mind may secretly build a new image. I am someone who has no ego, and in that very moment, ego is reborn in a more sophisticated form. Gautama Buddha warned against attachment not only to material things, but also to views and concepts. Even attachment to wisdom can become a chain. If you cling to the idea that you are enlightened, calmer, or more awakened than others, suffering quietly returns. The ego does not care what identity it wears, it only cares that it exists. It can be rich or poor, successful or struggling, confident or insecure, even spiritual or humble. As long as there is a solid I being defended, ego survives. This is why the path of Buddhism requires deep honesty. It asks you to observe not only gross reactions like anger and jealousy, but also subtle pride, subtle comparison, and subtle craving for recognition. Imagine meditating for years and then feeling superior to those who do not meditate. Imagine speaking gently but secretly judging others for their lack of awareness. Imagine practicing compassion yet feeling irritated when your compassion is not acknowledged. These are not failures, they are revelations. They reveal that ego can hide behind virtue. The mind loves identity. It loves certainty. It loves defining itself. Even the identity of a peaceful person can become a prison if it must be protected. If someone calls you impatient and it disturbs you deeply, but disturbance shows attachment to the image of being calm, true freedom is not becoming a better image. It is releasing the need for any fixed image. Buddhist wisdom goes beyond behavior. It goes into the root of identification. It asks you to see that all roles are temporary. The role of teacher, student, parent, leader, seeker, all are functional, not permanent. When you confuse function with identity, ego strengthens. When you understand function as fluid, ego weakens. The deepest peace comes when you act fully in the world without building a permanent self around your actions. You can succeed without becoming prideful. You can fail without becoming ashamed. You can guide others without believing you are superior. This balance is rare because the ego constantly tries to turn experience into identity. Another subtle trap appears in suffering itself. The ego can attach to being a victim. It can say, "My pain defines me." It can build identity around trauma, around struggle, around hardship. While pain deserves compassion, turning it into a permanent identity prolongs suffering. Buddhism does not deny pain, it denies fixation. You can acknowledge suffering without becoming it. You can honor your story without clinging to it. You can grow without solidifying a new identity. The spiritual path becomes powerful when you observe ego at every level. When pride arises, you see it. When insecurity arises, you see it. When the desire to appear wise arises, you see it. Seeing is enough. Ego dissolves in awareness because awareness does not identify. Think about the sky and the clouds. Clouds may be dark or bright, fast or slow. They fill the sky temporarily, but the sky does not become the clouds. In the same way, awareness does not become the thoughts. It does not become the identity. It simply allows them to arise and pass. When this realization deepens, a profound stability appears. You stop chasing the identity of being special. You stop fearing the identity of being ordinary. Ordinary life becomes sacred because it is free from performance. Walking becomes just walking. Breathing becomes just breathing. Listening becomes just listening. Without ego turning everything into self-reference, experience feels lighter. There is also a deeper compassion that unfolds. When you no longer define yourself rigidly, you stop defining others rigidly. You see that their anger is conditioning, their pride is conditioning, their fear is conditioning, just as yours was. This understanding reduces conflict. You no longer need to win arguments because your existence is not at stake. You no longer feel the urge to correct everyone because your identity is not threatened by their ignorance. You can allow differences without internal war. The ego fears disappearance. It believes that without identity there will be emptiness and meaninglessness. But what actually appears is freedom. Meaning does not vanish. It becomes purer. Actions are no longer driven by insecurity but by clarity. You help not to feel superior, but because compassion naturally flows. You speak not to dominate, but to communicate truth. You work not to prove worth, but to express skill. There is a silent dignity in this way of living. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is steady, and that steadiness is what inner peace truly feels like. Even in chaos, awareness remains present. Even in uncertainty, there is trust in impermanence. Even in difficulty, there is space around pain. The spiritual identity dissolves when you stop claiming awakening as possession. Awakening is not something the ego owns. It is the fading of ownership itself. When there is no one trying to be enlightened, clarity shines naturally. When there is no one trying to be important, humility becomes effortless. When there is no one trying to be secure, fear loses its grip. This is the paradox of the path. The more you attempt to become spiritually special, the more ego grows. The more you relax the need to become anything, the more peace unfolds. True inner peace is not dramatic enlightenment. It is quiet freedom from self-concern. It is the end of constant mental negotiation. It is the absence of invisible warfare. It is the simple recognition that awareness itself is enough. And when even the identity of the one who understands this fades, what remains is clarity without owner, peace without defender, and presence without pride. That is the depth of Buddhist insight. That is the final loosening of ego. And that is where unshakable inner peace lives. There is a stage on the path where the question is no longer, how do I remove ego? The deeper question becomes far more subtle. What remains when there is no center to defend? Most people live with an invisible center, a psychological headquarters called me. Every experience is filtered through it. Every event is judged according to how it affects it. Every relationship is shaped by how it validates or threatens it. This center feels real because it has been reinforced for years through memory, culture, and habit. But in Buddhist insight, that center is constructed. It is not a permanent entity. It is a pattern of clinging, repeated so often that it feels solid. Gautama Buddha did not teach people to destroy themselves. He taught them to see clearly that what they were defending was never fixed to begin with. When this clarity deepens, life changes in ways that are quiet yet profound. Living without a rigid center does not mean losing direction. It means losing defensiveness. Actions still arise. Decisions are still made. Responsibilities are still fulfilled. But the emotional turbulence surrounding them decreases. Imagine walking through criticism without feeling pierced. Imagine experiencing praise without swelling with pride. Imagine succeeding without building a throne and failing without digging a grave. This is not indifference. It is balance. When ego weakens, reactions slow down. There is space before response. Anger may still arise, but it is observed instead of obeyed. Fear may appear, but it is understood instead of amplified. Sadness may visit, but it is allowed to pass without becoming identity. This space changes everything. Without a center to defend, you listen more deeply. You no longer listen to prepare your defense. You listen to understand. Without a center to inflate, you speak more honestly. You no longer speak to protect image. You speak because truth is enough. Relationships transform in this atmosphere. Conflict loses intensity because there is less self-reference. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to protect every opinion. You can allow others to disagree without feeling diminished. The ego once created urgency. Everything felt personal. Everything felt significant. Without that center, life becomes simpler. Not dull, but lighter. Work becomes expression instead of competition. Love becomes connection instead of possession. Silence becomes comfort instead of loneliness. There is also a profound acceptance of impermanence. When there is no rigid self, change is no longer terrifying. Aging is not an attack. Loss is not annihilation. Transition is not betrayal. Everything is seen as part of a larger flow. The fear of being nobody dissolves because you no longer measure worth through identity. You recognize that awareness itself is not reduced by invisibility. You can be unseen and still be whole. You can be misunderstood and still be steady. This steadiness is not dramatic enlightenment. It is quiet clarity. Even in moments of chaos, there is a subtle knowing that experiences arise and pass. Thoughts move like wind. Emotions move like waves. Awareness remains open, not clinging to any of them. Living without a center to defend also brings humility that is natural, not forced. You do not feel superior because there is no solid self to elevate. You do not feel inferior because there is no rigid image to compare. You simply participate in life. Compassion grows effortlessly in this state. When you no longer obsess over protecting yourself, you see the struggles of others more clearly. You understand that their anger, pride, and fear are driven by the same egoic conditioning you once carried. Judgment softens, patience deepens. Buddhist wisdom speaks of liberation, not as acquiring something new, but as releasing what was unnecessary. When ego fades, nothing essential is lost. What disappears is tension. What dissolves is defensiveness. What ends is the endless narrative of self-importance. What remains is awareness functioning freely. You wake up in the morning without the heavy burden of maintaining an image. You move through the day responding rather than reacting. You rest at night without replaying every interaction in your mind. Peace becomes less fragile because it no longer depends on circumstances aligning perfectly. It is rooted in non-attachment. It is supported by understanding. It is stabilized by mindfulness. There may still be challenges. Life does not become free of difficulty, but difficulty no longer defines you. It becomes part of the unfolding process rather than a threat to identity. This is the subtle beauty of the path. It does not make you extraordinary in the eyes of the world. It makes you free in the privacy of your own mind, free from constant comparison, free from relentless defense, free from the hunger to be validated. You still act, you still love, you still create, but you do so without the weight of self-centered fear. And in that freedom, something quietly extraordinary happens. You realize that inner peace was never something to be achieved. It was obscured by the noise of ego. When the noise fades, peace is not constructed, it is uncovered. There is no grand announcement, no dramatic transformation visible from the outside. The shift is internal, subtle, yet irreversible. You walk through life with gentleness. You speak with clarity. You rest in simplicity. And even when storms arise, there is no solid center inside that feels shattered. There is movement, but no collapse. There is change, but no annihilation. This is living without a center to defend. This is freedom from ego's final grip. And this is the unshakable inner peace that Buddhist insight reveals when the illusion of I is finally seen for what it has always been, a temporary pattern, never a permanent self. There was never an enemy outside you. There was never a world conspiring against your peace. There was only a fragile image you were trying to protect. Ego promised strength, but it gave you tension. It promised importance, but it gave you fear. It promised control, but it chained you to constant defense. And yet, the moment you began to look at it with awareness, something extraordinary happened. The solid I you were protecting started to feel less solid. The reactions became softer. The comparisons became quieter. The endless mental arguments began to lose their intensity. Gautama Buddha did not offer a philosophy to believe in. He offered something far more powerful, a way to see clearly. When you see clearly that the self you defend is impermanent, fluid, and conditioned, the need to defend it fades naturally. You do not become empty in a negative sense. You become spacious. You become light. You become free. Inner peace is not something you manufacture. It is not a reward for becoming perfect. It is what remains when clinging ends. It is what shines when comparison stops. It is what breathes when there is no center left to defend. The world may still be loud. People may still disagree. Life may still change unexpectedly, but inside there is steadiness. Not because you built stronger walls, but because you no longer need walls at all. And maybe tonight, instead of asking, "How do I protect myself?" What am I protecting? Sit with that. Observe gently. Notice how thoughts arise and pass. In that simple awareness, you may discover something you have been searching for your entire life. Peace was never missing. It was only hidden behind the illusion of, i.e.,